Awesome. Thank you all for joining us. This talk is brought on by Talktopia. If you want to join us, head over to go/Talktopia. We are joined today by Eric Barker. He wrote this excellent book that I've used like 10,000 Post-it notes on. I probably killed a lot of trees, my apologies.
It says less about the quality of the book and more about your OCD than
pretty
anything
much.
else.
So the book's called Barking Up the Wrong Tree. The book is about success, common myths that we have, and what things we can make ourselves better. So I wanted to start with the first question is, what, after researching this book on success, were there things that you found yourself doing differently after it?
Writing the 6th chapter was on work-life balance, and I had been working so hard on the book that I was literally looking at this going, I'm violating like every one of the things I'm recommending. Like, I was not balanced. So for me, that was really critical, was to be able to sit there and kind of say, it's like, you know, to take on a really ambitious project. And then, you know, I had to really kind of algorithmically like go through the things I was talking about and start to incorporate them more myself, because I found myself getting so intense about this that my life really stopped having balance.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, in the first chapter, you talked about filtered and unfiltered leaders. Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, this is was really interesting. This is work done by Gautam Mukunda at Harvard Business School, and I connected strongly with it because I'd been writing about research on leadership, and I noticed this total discrepancy where half the research was saying that, you know, leaders are essential, they're critical, they pull people together, they give people a mission and a meaning and drive them forward. And the other half was saying that, you know, if you've got a bunch of, you know, real A players, they'll self-organize, you don't need some figurehead taking the credit. And it was totally in contradiction. And I was scratching my head. And then I came across Gautam's research, and what he saw was that there are actually 2 different kinds of leaders. There's filtered leaders and unfiltered leaders. And basically, you know, do leaders make a difference? Do they not? Well, when you're talking about filtered leaders, you're talking about people who are going through a vetted system, like in a typical hierarchical corporation. Those people are heavily vetted. So by the time anybody is in the running for CEO of GE, they've been so thoroughly vetted that they're almost indistinguishable. They would make the same decisions as anybody else. So their decisions don't have huge impact, because if you pick one person or the other, it's the same thing. Versus unfiltered leaders, so when you're talking about entrepreneurs, when you're talking about if the president steps down, the vice president, who was not chosen, comes up, those people are less predictable. They weren't filtered the same way through the system. So you can't expect them to make the same decisions. So they aren't predictable, and they create big change. Change is a value neutral word. Sometimes those changes are bad, but sometimes you've got, you know, unfiltered leaders like Abraham Lincoln, who was a perfect storm that resulted in him being elected. He ended slavery. I mean, so unfiltered leaders create big changes. Filtered leaders, not so much, but they each have their place. When you need a company or organization to keep going, they're doing well, prefer a filtered leader, and if you need changes, you know, you want an unfiltered leader.
Gotcha. And you talk about pond, like finding the right pond for the leader.
I mean, what I saw through looking at all the research on success is that, you know, and talking to actually to Gautam about this, was that the things that are really critical in terms of success in any arena is, you know, first knowing yourself, knowing your signature strengths. What are you good at? You know, what are you uniquely good at? Because the more time you spend, this is research you see from the University of Pennsylvania, in terms of when people exercise their signature strengths, they're happier, they're more successful, they feel more respected when they do things they're good at. And then aligning yourself, picking the right pond. In other words, what's a place that respects and values what you do? Because if you can be great at something, but if you're not in a place that really respects and rewards that, you're gonna have a tough time. So it's aligning, knowing thyself, picking the right pond. When those two are in alignment, you're in a really good position to be successful in whatever you do.
And that ties into knowing when to quit, right? Can you go into that?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that's really interesting, because grit is kind of having its time in the sun now, and everybody's talking about, you know, being gritty. And the truth is, we all quit things. We have to quit things. Otherwise, you know, I'd still be playing with action figures and playing t-ball. We all quit things as we move forward. So it's more of an issue of what do you quit? When do you quit? And there was some really interesting research by Gabrielle Ettingen at NYU, where she talked about this funny little word called whoop. And that's an acronym for when the issue you want to first wish, then it's the issue of what's the outcome you want, the obstacle, and then the plan. Those are 4 steps because we all like to dream. But the truth is, research shows when we dream, we actually sap our energy because our brains aren't good at telling fiction from reality. That's why movies are exciting. So when we dream, we can actually sap energy if we don't go to the next step, which is first is wish, second is to really think, what's the outcome you want? What is the crystal clear thing you want to achieve? And then once you wish, outcome, then you have to think about the obstacle. That's the tough part. What's in the way? What is stopping you from getting what you want? And then the 4th part is a plan. How are you going to overcome that obstacle? When people walk through that, then you're really in a good position. That's what's called in academia implementation intentions. You're really in a good position to move forward. But the secondary effect is really fascinating. Is when people go through this WHOOP exercise, if they feel energized, if they feel better about their goals, that generally indicates, the research shows, that they're realistic, that this is something they could do. And if they feel de-energized, the goal's probably unrealistic. Okay. So using that WHOOP exercise can really help people decide when to use grit and when to quit, because they'll look at their dreams, their wishes, they walk through this, they can see if they have an adequate plan, if that goal's reachable, and then they can make the decision whether to kind of quit on that or to at least come up with a different method to try and get there.
And it's protection from people who seem to be geared towards more positive thinking, where it adds a little bit of pessimism so they can kind of...
You always have to think about what are the challenges, because otherwise, it stays merely a dream versus saying, what's in the way? Why don't I have this? And then you can start to create an action plan to get there.
Gotcha. Can you talk about the student who went to, I believe it was Brown University or Princeton, and decided I want to become the baddest person in Kung Fu ever?
Yeah, this was Matt Polly. Matt was at Princeton, and he dropped out of Princeton because he decided he wanted to master Kung Fu. And he moved to China. He studied at the Shaolin Temple, and it was a crazy. His parents went nuts. He didn't fit in, but this was a dream of his, and at the end, he realized he wasn't going to be the baddest man in the world. So he quit his dream at that point. He realized he was never going to be the toughest guy on the planet. But that crazy experience, that chance he took, ended up launching a writing career, and now he's a very successful author.
Gotcha. You had a quote in there. Trying to find it now. I have 10,000 post-it notes, but it was about when he went to the final bout and he was seeing the master fighting. Do you remember that full quote?
I'm not sure which part.
He was with his friend, and his friend. Oh, cool. So it goes. They were studying what the master is and wanted to see the master fight. So they saw the master fight, and the master was fighting someone. He literally almost tore this guy's head off. And he turns to his friend and he's like, well,
Well, that was the guy the guy who was leading the tournament.
Right, yeah.
This was the tournament that Matt was fighting in. And Matt's watching the guy who he's going to have to fight next. And he sees this guy destroy his opponent. And Matt and they had to take the opponent out on a stretcher. And Matt's friend tries to calm Matt down, make him feel better, and says, don't worry, they will not take you out on a stretcher. Matt says, oh, that feels good. He's like, yeah, you're too tall for Chinese stretchers. They'll just leave you on the tarmac. So it's just it's not a good situation.
Oh, boy. Can you talk about the impact of networks? Because I think some of us think if we just put our heads down and work really, really hard and are good, that somehow our work will sell itself and we'll be okay.
The research is pretty consistent. Networks are really powerful. Being connected makes a big difference. And I looked at a wide range of research, even extending out to drug dealers. Drug dealers with bigger networks are more successful and are less likely to be incarcerated. Networks matter everywhere in terms of getting hired, in terms of there was even a study done, I believe at IBM, where employees with bigger networks actually ended up creating more value for the company. So basically, if you looked at the individual employee and you calculated how many people they had in their Rolodex, like their contact list on their smartphone, you could actually quantify how much more value that person was worth to the company. So networks from top to bottom in terms of getting hired, getting promoted, and across the board, are valuable. And so in the book, I go into what the research shows can help people increase the size of their network because it makes a difference.
Gotcha. Are there any quick tips that you can provide people here about building a network?
Absolutely. The simplest and easiest thing, because networking, it's kind of like a dirty word. It feels sleazy. Nobody likes to do it because it feels very transactional. And the simplest thing from the research that people can do to increase the size of their network is to reconnect with old friends. You have tons of people, friends on Facebook, in your smartphone, LinkedIn contacts, who you just haven't talked to in maybe years. And reconnecting with people, now it's not sleazy, and it's not scary. You already know these people, you're already friends with them. So reconnecting with people is a really great way to increase your network size, and you don't have to have any awkwardness or any sleaziness because they're people you already know. A second thing that's pretty simple is when, I think this was research by Brian Uzi and Sharon Dunlap, was that there are super connectors. If you look through your contact list, you're going to find that a disproportionate number of people were introduced to you by a handful of people. We all have that one friend who introduced us to so many other friends. Those people are your super connectors. So if you want to build your network and you only have limited time, you only have limited resources, then you want to give a disproportionate amount of attention to those super connectors and ask them, hey, I'm looking for a new job. Who should I talk to? Hey, I'm looking to make new friends in a new city I moved to. Who should I talk to? Those super connectors are the hubs of networks, and that's where you're going to get the most bang for your buck.
And you mentioned a guy named Panda. His nickname is Panda.
Yeah, Adam Rifkin was Fortune magazine, I think it was 2012, called him the most networked guy in Silicon Valley. And Adam Rifkin, who's a great guy, is a shy introvert. Mm-hmm. But he is great at connecting people, and he's a really, really nice guy. He just believes in one of the tips that comes from Adam is the 5-minute favor, where he just thinks, what can I do for somebody to help them out that will only take 5 minutes of my time? Whether it's offering them a resource, link to something they might be interested in, or connecting two people who are in the same arena, just doing little things like that. Because he has a gargantuan network, and you'd think that would take an enormous amount of time to maintain, but it's actually relatively simple when he's thinking about just little things he can do to provide value to others. And it's created this enormous, incredible network.
Mm-hmm. And I think when people are starting their network, a lot of it is that the fear of failure. That I have to say the right thing, the right person to impress them. And then if they mess up in a connection, then they have this negative self-talk.
Yeah.
So you were talking about the importance of positive self-talk and the correlation between success rates and BUD/S Navy SEAL training.
Yeah.
Can you go into that?
Yeah, we all say approximately 300 to 1,000 words to ourselves every minute. And those can be positive, those can be negative. Now, we're not getting into the secret here where, where what you say to yourself is going to magically, create money or success or whatever. But in terms of the things you say to yourself, the Navy, basically after 9/11, the Navy wanted to increase the number of Navy SEALs. But if you reduce the threshold for the difficulty of BUD/S, the vetting program, then the SEALs aren't going to be as good. So they were thinking, how can we help people get through it without lowering standards? And one of the 4 things that they realized was positive self-talk. Was because that story you're telling yourself in your head becomes self-fulfilling prophecy. And there's tons of research, much of it done by Martin Seligman, in terms of the power of optimism, where just when we believe we can, it makes sense to continue. When it's pretty intuitive. When you feel like things aren't going to work out, why would you persist? When you think like things are going to work out, then it makes sense. So when your self-talk is positive, when you see positive things in your life as personal, you're responsible for them, that they're permanent, they're going to keep on going, and they're pervasive, they're affecting a big area of your life, you're more likely to persist, you're more likely to go on, and that was one of the key things that helped recruits get through Navy SEAL training.
Gotcha. And didn't you also talk about the importance of that positive self-talk for your own mental health and well-being? Because I think one thing I hear about is people want to network, but they always say, well, I have no value to give. Why should I be doing this? Mm-hmm. But then if you look at Oprah, for instance, I mean, she was born in a single family, single parent household, came from poverty, but she always looked at herself differently, which allowed her to get over those
I mean,
problems.
there's a strong connection, again, that same research between, resilience and grit and optimism, is that people who have that positive self-talk that says that good things are personal, permanent, and pervasive, and the bad things are not personal, permanent, and pervasive, they are more likely to persist, to show resilience in the face of difficulty, and to keep going. So if you're trying to achieve a goal, whatever it is, having that perspective will be beneficial in terms of keeping going.
And then there's some people who are so confident they kind of create like self-delusion about.
Yeah, confidence is tricky because the whole confidence paradigm is very tricky because confidence as a whole, the benefits of confidence are that it feels good. Feels good to be powerful. To that it has enormous influence on others. There's research showing that people will choose confidence over expertise. They will actually choose a person who is more confident with a worse track record than the person with a better track record who comes across as less confident. But confidence can also lead to hubris, narcissism, delusion. And lower confidence helps us learn. We're open to new ideas, but it doesn't feel good and it doesn't create a good impression on others. So what you see is that the whole confidence paradigm is kind of tricky because confidence is often either delusional or contingent. It's delusional because we tell ourselves these outsized lies, about who we are, and eventually there's going to be a market correction. Reality is going to hit you in the face and show you where you really stand. So it can be delusional or it can be contingent, where basically you wake up feeling like I need to slay a dragon every day in order to have self-worth, and you're on this treadmill of I have to keep performing in order to have self-esteem.
You're never really happy, right?
Yeah, and so you're on this roller coaster of emotions where how you do in life is constantly affecting how you feel, and the anxiety of knowing everything you do is going to affect how you feel about yourself. As opposed to taking, as I talk about in the book, the perspective of self-compassion, which originally comes from Buddhism, but now Kristen Neff at University of Texas has been showing that the self-compassionate attitude, taking a realistic view, but rather than having an unrealistic view of how awesome I am, taking the view that I'm going to see the world the way it is, and I'm going to forgive myself when I screw up. The research basically shows that perspective gives all the benefits of self-confidence without the downsides of narcissism or hubris or seeing the world in a unrealistic way.
True, keeps you grounded.
Yeah.
So, you talked about the ghost army.
Yeah.
Can you go into that and how it plays into the book?
Yeah, basically in World War II, there was a whole unit that was dedicated toward deception, where basically their goal was, you're talking about less than 1,000 men whose job it was to, these were artists and guys who might not have fit in other areas of the military, and their job was to be less than 1,000 men who appeared to be 10,000 or more soldiers. So they could actually fill in gaps in the line in World War II. And there was a unit that had huge speakers that would play the sounds of tanks coming. They had 95-pound inflatable tanks, which occasionally they'd use a rope to keep the barrel of the tank up because it would deflate. But from the sky, enemy planes, recon planes, would see what looks like tanks from a quarter mile away. They'd hear the sound of tanks. And they even had radio operators who would be, making fake signals to sound like there was a huge division there. And I talk about this in the context of, when we're presenting ourselves to others, is it good to try and deceive?
Mm-hmm.
This was effective in World War II, but deceiving others as to who you are can be an effective short-term strategy, but it's usually not a very effective long-term strategy.
Especially people can read that this person's not the real deal.
Eventually, you develop a reputation. Eventually people do see who you are. And in terms of the issue of ethics, so in the book when I talk about when nice guys finish last, that whole idea, often it's split into the issue of short-term versus long-term. And a lot of negative, bad traits are very effective in the short term, but they're not effective in the long term. So if you look at narcissists do better in job interviews, they do better on first dates, but what you see is after a few weeks on the job, narcissists are regarded as untrustworthy. After a few months, the relationship partners of narcissists report being enormously dissatisfied. It works very well up front, not so well in the long term. And across the board, you see this with a lot of negative traits. Short-term effectiveness, long-term not so much. So if you're a used car dealer, it might be a fantastic choice. But if you're working in an organization that you plan on being for a number of years, probably not a good idea.
Gotcha. And going back to World War II,
Yeah.
I was thinking about unfiltered, filtered leaders.
Yeah.
Where would you put Patton in that?
I don't know. I don't know enough about my history
Okay.
to talk about Patton. Sorry.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, I was thinking, I was gonna kind of say unfiltered because just the way that he talked to people and his troops respected him, but the upper brass hated him.
Yeah.
And the German generals used to call him that cowboy American general who's crazy.
Yeah.
But he seemed to be like that perfect general we need for that situation, which is wartime.
Yeah.
But then once the peace happened, it's like, where do you put that unfiltered person in a filtered organization that's so top down like the military?
Well, one thing that you see that is critical in terms of success is the issue of people usually discount context. People's first reaction is, I'm successful, I've been successful, I will continue to be successful. And that's rarely the case. If you look research by Boris Groysberg at Harvard Business School, you see that when top stock market analysts would leave one firm and go to another firm, they wouldn't stay top stock market analysts. But if they brought their team with them, they usually stayed at that high-performing level. Because again, that context, that shorthand that we develop with others, that understanding, that's really critical. And that's kind of when I talk about the idea of knowing yourself, but then also picking the right pond. That issue of your skill set is great, but you can be the greatest guitarist in the world. If you work at an accounting firm, that's not very valuable there, you know? So it's the skills you have, and it's, where are they? Are those valuable and respected there? And it's aligning those two. So people have to think about context. The other element of context is when you're talking about the issue of ethics, where, peer pressure influences all of us, not just teenagers. So if you're going to a company, Bob Sutton, who's a professor at Stanford, when I talked to him, he had a great quote that I loved where he said, whenever you interview at a company, look around at the people who work there. Because you're going to become like them, they're not going to become like you. And if that's not lined up, if that's not who you want to be, then you better really make another choice.
It's true. Now, does timing tie into context too? Like if you're a wonder kid you couldn't have possibly a great software engineer, but you were born like in the 1940s or 30s or something.
I mean, you see that. I think Malcolm Gladwell talks about that in Outliers, is that issue of timing, and also, where is the organization you're looking at working for? They might need something different at a different time. If a company is doing fantastic, again, they might need a filtered leader to just keep it stable and steady. If you're in an industry in decline, what they're doing currently obviously is not working. Right. So they need to mix it up. They need an unfiltered leader, because if you're headed towards the ground anyway, you might as well take a change, take a risk, and be able to pull out of it versus just continuing what isn't working.
Gotcha. You mentioned a person in San Francisco called the Emperor Norton.
Yeah.
The defender of Mexico. I've never heard of this person ever before. Can you talk about that a little bit?
This was a guy in San Francisco who became San Francisco's unofficial mascot, where he basically said that he was the Emperor of the United States, and the people of San Francisco at the time kind of bought into it, and he would just walk around, kind of declare. The police all sort of doffed their hats to him. He would get free meals at restaurants, and he just was extremely confident in there, but utterly deluded. And I use that story to illustrate the issue of, confidence going. We talk about confidence like this. It's this panacea. You gotta have confidence. You can't be lack of confidence. And there are downsides to confidence. When you take confidence out to the extreme, it can be delusional. You can lead to narcissism or hubris. Confidence isn't the answer to everything. And I use that to illustrate when confidence goes too far.
Right. And didn't he write letters to Congress saying I'm disbanding
Oh, he made
Congress?
decrees.
He made decrees.
He made decrees.
Yeah.
Some of which actually worked out well. He was way ahead in terms of diversity, and he said there should be a Bay Bridge before there was a Bay Bridge, and he had some really good ideas, some of which eventually got enacted.
I guess there was like a race riot happening in San Francisco between like the white populace and the Chinese Americans. I guess he got in between it and talked everyone down.
He was involved in a lot, although he didn't have any real authority.
Right.
Some of his predictions came true.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm going to go to some audience questions now. Nassim Taleb wrote, "Success isn't being on top of a hierarchy, it's standing outside of all hierarchies. Given the focus on promotion within many corporate environments, how do you feel about this viewpoint?"
I think it depends on personal goals. I think, most people, are going to work inside of an organization, and, it depends on what are your skills. If your skills are drawing people together. We're seeing increasingly people are able to work on their own. They're able to do their own thing. But most people are going to work for organizations, and so I don't think that's the only way.
Gotcha. Can you talk about Tim Crater's Stabiversary?
Oh, yeah. This was Tim Crater's a cartoonist, and when he was on vacation in Greece, he was actually stabbed in the neck and almost died. He describes it as there's a difference of about 1 millimeter between him going home in coach and him going home in the cargo hold, and the thing was, when he came home for the next year, he was basically incapable of being sad or disappointed because he was just so thrilled to be alive. He was so happy because everything was compared to, I could be dead.
Right.
But after a year, things started to frustrate him again. He started to get sad again. You can't sustain that forever. So he started celebrating his Stabiversary, the day when he got stabbed, to kind of remind him, hey, I'm lucky to be here. Hey, this is really great that I have any opportunity. Bad things are going to happen. I'm not going to be thrilled about them all the time, but I'm lucky to be here at all. And that's something we can all kind of learn from in terms of happiness.
That's a really good idea. Hopefully I don't have to get stabbed to do that, but
no, you could skip that part.
Okay, good. So how do we go about finding the right pond? Does that take a lot of introspection, or do you go out there and get experience? What would be the best way to?
I mean, the best thing first and foremost is to let other people do the work for you. Hey, going out there, we can all each only do so much, but you can read online, and then past that, you can talk to people. But first, getting to know yourself, getting to know your signature strengths. It's like, what am I consistently good at? And the research shows a good way to go about that is actually to ask the people around you, because when people ask themselves, what am I good at? They're actually quite bad at it. Like, people are not always good at that. But when you ask your friends, when you ask your coworkers, preferably if you can do it anonymously, if you can have them kind of submit to it, have a friend filter them for you so it's anonymous, you can get some much more objective feedback. And it turns out the people around us often know our strengths and our weaknesses better than we do. And then there's something that Gautam Mukunda talks about called intensifiers, which are qualities that are not at the mean are not necessarily positive, but in the right context can be. So in other words, you might be somebody who's stubborn. Well, in interpersonal relationships, stubbornness is a negative. If you're an entrepreneur, stubbornness is persistence. So those qualities are dependent on context. So knowing what your signature strengths are, knowing what your intensifiers are. If you don't have that, then looking at environments isn't going to be very helpful. You need to say, what am I good at? What am I bad at? And what qualities do I have that, dependent on context, might be positives or negatives. And then you can start to look at, what interests you, what is aligned with your skill set. You can do a lot of that research online, but in the end, you want to get to a point where you're talking to people, because in the end, it's going to be hard to get an honest answer about the culture of an organization. Going back to that Bob Sutton quote on, you're going to become like those people, they're not going to become like you. You need to talk to people who have worked there, who are working there, to get an idea of if that's going to be a good fit, if that is the right pond for you.
Gotcha. Yeah, what I usually tell new college grads is when you are looking for to learn about a new career is to go talk to someone who's working it and ask them, like, what are the 3 best things with this job?
Yeah.
And then what are the 3 things that need improvement and you don't like? So you can kind of hear the kind of even keel take what's going on in the organization. Yeah. I have Glenn Gould in here. So can you tell us a story about Glenn Gould?
Glenn Gould was, considered one of the greatest pianists of the 20th century, but he's a very strange guy, a very, very odd guy, and had a lot of crazy quirks. He would always wear gloves, sometimes multiple pairs at the same time. He had this crazy chair that he used at every performance that was like sloped and low. You can actually hear it creaking on the recordings of it. But this was a guy who was so odd and so strange, but there's so many environments he never would have fit in. He never would have been fine. But finding his thing, playing the piano, and finding the right environment, he's achieved the highest level, that you can in terms of celebrity. He was mentioned on The Simpsons, so that's it. That's the highest level. He's done that. He's considered one of the greatest pianists ever. But he's this oddball. But he found the right environment for him, and that's what makes all the difference. A lot of people have a lot of skills, but if it's not aligned, it's not going to work.
Right. Then one thing I see a lot is people who are just fantastic in their line of work, but they want to try something new.
Yeah.
But they're afraid of getting started because it's not going to be perfect.
Yeah.
And I think in your book you talk about it's more about the quantity of production, less about just producing one great thing. Could you talk more about that?
You see across the board that very often quantity produces quality. Is that when the research on patent applications, the people who submit more patent applications end up getting more patents. When you look at scientific research, the researchers who produce the most papers usually end up with the handful that are great. So people who are more prolific, ceteris paribus, people who are more prolific end up producing more great stuff. So you have to take chances. You have to give things a shot and just do more to get out there. I mean, sometimes there's a cost to that, but if there isn't, if you can just put in the hours, more work. And that, of course, leads to the work-life balance problem where, doing more, does produce results. So you have to know when to stop because ceteris paribus, more work, more results, but you also want to have a personal life as well.
Gotcha. How do you find that balance for yourself?
That's one that I struggle with, but in the end, as I talk about in the book, it's the issue is in the modern era. We talk about work-life balance a lot. Nobody did 40, 50 years ago, and that's because the world has changed. Because now you have your smartphone in your pocket 24/7. You can you can't say, oh, I left those papers at the office. I'll get them for you tomorrow at 9 a.m. No, they're available currently in the cloud. You can check your email wherever you go. You always have the option to work. Before, the doors of the office closed at 5 p.m. Now they don't. So basically, the onus has shifted to us, where we need to make a decision. And that's what's critical is, so for everyone, the idea of this sort of go, success as determined outside yourself is going to be inherently problematic. You need a personal definition of success where you're saying, I'm going to work this hard, and if that means I don't get the promotion, I'm okay with that. Or I want that promotion, and if that means I spend less time with my family, I'm okay with that. But the decision has to be based on a personal definition of success, what you want, because the world is not going to decide for you. The world is going to say, keep going until you drop.
And this goes into your point of choosing your problems.
Yeah, it's choosing the problems you want to have, where it's kind of like, am I more comfortable sacrificing a bit of my social life? Am I more comfortable, not getting that promotion at work? But the research that was done, I think it was Stevenson and Nash at Harvard did some research, and the people who had gotten closest to some approximation of work-life balance had 4 metrics that they evaluated their life by. And that was happiness, achievement, significance, and legacy. Because the problem that most people do is they use a single metric. And often that single metric is money. Because it's a number and it's made easy, make that go up.
Right.
But then you end up sacrificing happiness, health, relationships, all these other things. So you need this balance of the 4, where happiness, do you enjoy what you're doing? Achievement, are you getting ahead in your goals? Significance, is what you're doing positively affecting those around you that you love? And then legacy, to some degree, are you making the world a better place? And people who, if you look at your schedule and you say, I'm making a little deposit in each one of those 4 buckets every week, every month, that's where people start to find a balance. Because the problem is when they use that collapsing one metric, you miss stuff. Or if people try and use a sequencing strategy where, okay, when I'm this, I'm just going to focus on my career, and then I'm just going to focus on that, and life doesn't work out like that. It's like relationships. You can't ignore your kids for the first 10 years and then make up for it. That doesn't work. So people need to balance happiness, achievement, significance, and legacy.
Gotcha. It's nice having those 4 metrics because you can kind of see when you're putting too much time in a certain bucket.
Yeah, this one's getting way too much on happiness and you just got fired.
Right.
Or way too much on achievement and you're really kind of miserable. Or you're working hard, you might be happy, but is that benefiting those around you? There are things we need to try and find a balance for, and each person's balance is going to be different, but over time you can start to see what works for you.
Right. I had a mentor who he marched with Dr. Martin Luther King when he was little, and then he got into IBM, and his mentor was African American. He's African American, and his mentor had a door closed on him because he's black, and he talked to my mentor and told him what to do to pursue this career and go forward. But my mentor focused so much just on that career metric. Like, so long as this company was happy with him, everything was okay. But then when you come home, the family's not there, and he's missed out on some of the most important life experiences just because he's focused on one thing. So it's very easy to focus on something external because it's easily definable, but trying to define what an ideal inner balance or family life is kind of a little bit more subject to interpretation.
Oh no! In the book, I tell the story of Ted Williams, one of the greatest baseball players of all time, and when he was just so focused on hitting, so focused on success in baseball that he wasn't present for the births of any of his 3 children. When his daughter asked him, Dad, tell me about yourself, he said, read my biography, and and he realized he just wasn't there, and he wasn't very happy, and he got divorced 3 times, and he paid huge prices for his success, and I think that's something that at first it seems like you be this great legendary baseball player at Cooperstown, but in the end, I mean, is that going to lead to a happy, well-rounded life? Is consistently you see that many high achievers make a Faustian bargain of sorts, where they completely sacrifice their personal life and personal happiness for success, and again, like if more work produces more results, then you have to make the choice. Where am I going to stop? Because it won't be decided for you.
Right, and it's so hard to get out on top, right? So many people just want to continually ride that high and relive their past dreams. Yeah. And then once you get that Super Bowl championship or what you're looking for, it's like, okay, that's another thing off the list I cross out, but now it has not much meaning in the present or in the future. No.
So it's critical to have that personal definition where this is enough for me.
I have a question. Ellen asks, you mentioned in your book that overconfidence can be incredibly damaging to an organization. What are some tactics to recognize this in ourselves and ways to change it if it's present?
Well, the issue of overconfidence is really critical because I think Malcolm Gladwell talked about this in a lecture he gave, where underconfidence is the sin of the amateur. Overconfidence is the sin of the expert. So the real danger comes from overconfidence because we trust experts with a lot of power. So overconfidence is what produces a housing crisis or a stock market collapse, because it's the people who have the authority, who have the power. That's what they usually make the mistake of. One of the best things in terms of limiting that on a personal basis is making sure you have people around you that you're still listening to. Even Machiavelli, who is not lauded very highly in ethics circles, said that a great leader has to have people around him who will be honest with him, who he can trust, because otherwise you're going to spin out of control. You need people who will be honest with you. But past that, something you can do. Peter Drucker, one of the leading management experts of the 20th century, talk about feedback analysis, where basically when you're making predictions, write them down. When you're trying things, and then see how effective your predictions were. See when you say, this project's going to go well, I'm not sure about this one. And then you can start to get an idea over time how accurate Am I because that's the problem with too much confidence, is the issue of delusion, where you're not in touch with reality anymore. As I've mentioned in the book, the old saying, there's no such thing as a pretty good alligator wrestler. You either are or you aren't, and that's something where overconfidence gets you killed.
Right.
But there's usually not such an obvious corrective mechanism as
Right.
there is in alligator wrestling
Yeah.
in day-to-day life.
I like that idea of tracking your thoughts. So here's a challenge to the audience. Anytime you're going in a situation where it's ambiguous, you don't know what's going to happen, open up a spreadsheet and write what you think is going to happen, or write the situation, what you think is going to happen, and then after the situation happens, write down exactly what happened, and then go back to the list, and you can kind of see where your thoughts are gearing towards. So my thoughts sometimes are geared towards more on pessimism for certain meetings, or more optimism on other meetings. And then when you get back in the situation of being ambiguous, you can go, oh, wait a minute, my mind tends to go in this default mode. Maybe there's something else I'm missing here, so that you can catch yourself when you get yourself locked in those thought patterns.
And you'll be shocked to see how much you rewrite history.
Yeah.
When you go back and see what you wrote, you'll be like, that's not the story I've been telling myself. Memory is not this, perfect hard drive recording everything. It's constantly being rewritten, and you will be shocked at what you wrote then and what you believe now. So it's actually a really useful exercise.
Right. I had my old journals from 2008, and I was reading them. I'm like, I don't know who the hell this guy is, but I hate him.
Yeah.
And compared to then, I'm reading the current ones, like, oh, that's me. But to see your thoughts evolve over time, you're like, okay, you can see the improvement in what you're skewed towards. So I have someone asking, how to be a super connector myself. How can someone go about becoming a super connector?
I mean, the critical thing there is, I think it was Ben Casnocha had some really good advice there, where it was basically is budgeting time and money for networking. Is taking an amount of time, because it's, if you say, I'm going to devote this many hours, towards it, make it a skill, something you practice like anything else. I am always going to be looking for introductions, and I am going to designate this many hours. Every Sunday lunch is going to be with somebody new. And I am going to put aside X amount of money for Sunday lunch, or how many coffees. I am going to have coffee or drinks with somebody 2 nights a week. Budget it, make it a part of your schedule, and start to put that together. And then past that, it's always a matter of every time you meet somebody, see who they can introduce you to. Right. Is who else should I talk to? Who else should I meet? And then to create a more powerful network all around is start mixing and matching. Start introducing new people you've met to people you knew before, and the opportunities will start to multiply. Right. Like a fission reactor. I mean, it's just going to start to expand. But the first critical thing is just like anything else: give it dedicated time, dedicated budget, and be consistent.
Makes sense. And there's 2 other points you had too. One was saying thank you and having that gratitude, because the gratitude, I mean, we look at it as one way of making someone else feel better. But then I think some of the studies you had in the book said that there's all these biological benefits to the person saying thanks. Oh,
gratitude works both ways. The best thing about, when I'm talking about happiness, what's great about gratitude is it makes 2 people happy. Is, thanking someone else makes them feel good, but also, taking the time to be grateful for things makes us, basically keeps that top of mind. What is most advertising trying to do? They're trying to make their products or their company top of mind. That's why you see so many ads over and over and over again, just so that when you think of soda, you think of Pepsi or you think of Coke. They want to stay top of mind. Well, one of the most powerful and replicated happiness studies is writing down 3 good things that happened to you that day before you go to bed at night. Why? Because it makes them more top of mind. Tons of good things happen to you every day, tons of bad things happen to you every day. But so you can only focus on so much, you only have so much bandwidth in your head. So what's going to be top of mind? What are you going to remember that day? What are you going to remember from that day? And if you take the time with those 3 things, you're going to be happier. So gratitude, just Sean Aker, one of the things he recommends is first thing you do when you get into the office every day is just sit down and write a thank you email or send a thank you text to someone else. It'll make them feel good, it'll make you feel good, and how you feel in the morning, the research shows, affects the rest of your day. That's very awesome. Very simple happiness exercise, and critical for connecting with people, showing them that they are valuable to you.
Yeah, I have a calendar reminder for every Friday to send out a thank you to somebody.
Absolutely.
And another point you brought up is doing your homework. After someone gives you an assignment for connecting with them, actually coming back full circle and saying, hey, you told me to do this and whatnot.
Following up. Well, that's critical with mentors. I mean, because there's nothing that's going to irritate mentors more than when they give you good advice and you don't actually follow through with it. So listening to what a mentor says, it also allows you to stay in touch with the mentor. Because if the mentor is actually really valuable, they're probably going to be busy. You hope they're going to be busy. They've got a lot of stuff going on. So they give you advice, you go, you follow through on the advice, you get the results, you come back, now you can say, hey, I followed through on your advice, here are the results. I'm thinking about what I should do next. I've put some thought into it. Here's 2 possibilities. If you have a chance, I'd love to hear what you think would be the best next step for me. That's a great way to keep a relationship with a mentor going, and it's flattering to them that somebody is taking their advice and actually following through with it. It sounds simple, it sounds stupid, but the truth is, so many people just don't. They'll bother a busy person, ask them a question, and then not do it. If you did and you document it, you got positive results, and then you're asking their advice, that's the thing. And if you're somebody who does their homework, it's so many people, so many busy, successful people. It's like they get people clamoring for their time, but they don't follow through. Those people didn't do their homework. They didn't. You don't need to ask the head. If you're looking for investment advice, you don't need to contact the CEO of Goldman Sachs. There's easier ways to do it. Right. So you want to make sure you're asking the right questions. Did you do your homework? Is this the person you have to talk to get the answer? If you've done that much work, you're going to impress people. You're going to stand out above the other 99.9% of people who reach out to them.
Right.
So following through, doing your homework, it really makes a difference when you're trying to make relationships, with potential mentors.
Gotcha. And then also, these people have busy family lives with your careers. Yeah. And if someone comes up to you and says, hey, can you be my mentor? It's like, well, I'm thinking of a terribly long time commitment that person does not have. So I always looked at it as like friendships. It's sort of like, maybe I can research as much as possible with this person on the internet without being a stalker, but going on their blog and learning. And then if I have a question that can't be answered, make sure it's something that can be answered within 5 minutes. It doesn't require them to write their life story out.
No, and what you see in the research is that the best mentor relationships become like friendships. But asking that, will you be my mentor? It's kind of like asking somebody to marry you on the first date. Yeah. Like it's just like that's a huge commitment to somebody who just emailed me and asked me a question and they had like 6 spelling errors in the email. Like versus asking questions. Showing you did the work, showing that you're somebody who's smart, and showing them that they are the right person to ask that question to. Right. That there is no other way. Right. I want to be this level of Jedi. I got to talk to Yoda. That's they're the perfect person for this. That's respectful. You're respecting their time. You're not putting all the effort on them. Right. This is not something that could be answered with one Google search. It's like this is something that shows them that you are an A player like they are. You're trying to get to the next level, and they're the right person to talk to. And that's how you get a good mentor.
That's true. And then also like the introduction's a double opt-in introduction.
Yeah.
First I would go to Eric, because let's say I want Eric to talk to Brian, and I know Brian's good for Eric. First I'll go to Eric, ask him if he's okay with the introduction. Then I'll go back to Brian, explain to him why it's beneficial for me to Eric, and if he agrees, then introduce them both. Because I'm sure you get a lot of introductions where it's like,
yeah, hey, here's somebody you really have no interest in talking to. Why don't you guys chat? It's like, no. How about we don't?
So for my last online question, this is from Lisa. She says, there's a lot of information in your book and a lot of information to learn and retain to day-to-day life. In your opinion, how should we retain all this information and how much of it?
It's I don't think that everybody needs to learn everything in there. I think there are areas where they're strong, there are areas where they're weak. Some people might be in a great situation in terms of in terms of the nice guys finish last issue. They might be surrounded by other, in Adam Grant's terminology, they might be surrounded by other givers. Might be a good place. That might not be something they're worried about, but they might have a big problem with the work-life balance issue. Or somebody might be really great at networking, but they might have a real confidence issue. Focus on the stuff that is going to benefit them, individually. Like what goals do you have? What serves those goals? Don't try and do everything. Pick one thing, get that right, and then move on to what is of secondary interest. So there's no need to exhaustively go through every piece of advice in there.
Excellent. Do we have any in-audience questions? We're going to get you a mic real quick.
I also wrote a book on the science of success, and I was completely shocked because I had read hundreds of books talking about positive mental attitude, mostly written by armchair plagiarists quoting each other and doing a lot of scientific research, but the scientific research was always with slightly above average people. They didn't actually, because you can't go out and get the #1 in the world, it's really hard. Say, hey, I'm gonna follow you around with videotape. Mm-hmm. But I did that, and I was blown away that in sales at least, the #1 in corporate jets and the #1 life insurance salesperson in the world were the most negative people I've ever met in my life. They beat up on themselves verbally, and then I contrasted that with homeless people who would say, I'm happy, I'm always happy. I'm living in this cardboard box, but I'm happy. So I was completely shocked because this defied everything I've been reading everywhere, and I was expecting to hear more of that here, because you said that everything that's contrary to what you normally hear in science. And so what these people would do, and they're #1 in their field. One of them is #1 life insurance. He'd sell $4.5 million, selling 2 days a week. So he'd meet the $1 million round table every 2 days. Incredible. Worldwide, #1. He would beat up on himself verbally. He would tell himself negative things. I'm doing terrible today. I need to push myself harder. That was, you can't, Harvey, you did a terrible job. Why do you like doing this? He beat up on himself. So it was completely the opposite of everything I ever heard in all the literature out there. But these were the #1 people in their field. Any comments?
There are exceptions to every rule. I mean, there are exceptions to every rule.
But okay, here's another question. How many of the success books out there actually are able to get the #1 person in the world and follow them around with cameras and videotape, and et cetera? Scientific studies are, if you look at them, other than Xerox Professional Selling Skills, which studied slightly above average people, but not the very best, none of them, at least in the field of sales, had actually gone out and followed around #1 people. No, none of them, because they can't get them. They're impossible. So I think a lot of what is reported in success literature is the average people or the slightly above average, and it's a lot of researchers quoting each other and others' research and quoting and doing research of groups that are below average or medium or mediocre, but not the very best. How many actually go out and study #1 in the world?
There are a number of studies that looked at some of the top people in the world, but it depends specifically on what's your question in terms of their attitude, in terms of, again, there's success, there's also happiness. Those can be very different, and attitudes do vary based on profession. So, being optimistic produces persistence, produces grit. That doesn't necessarily mean, again, if it's in an industry that's doomed, persistence is not going to result, in success. So I think it has to be very specific on what you are studying. If you look at attorneys are usually score far higher on pessimism and negativity than most other people. It is because it is a beneficial quality in law. Because you need, when you're doing a contract, to consider everything that could go wrong and make sure your client is covered for that. So pessimism is a benefit. And if you score higher in pessimism, you score higher on the LSAT across the board. So, entrepreneurs as well, negativity can be a benefit in the sense of, yeah. So so the qualities vary in terms of what the role is, but also you also have to be very specific about what you're looking for. You're talking about persistence, or you're talking about financial success, or you're talking about personal happiness. So what you're looking at, those can vary dramatically. So I mean, it depends on how specific the study is and what they're measuring.
Do we have any other questions? Allison, I think we have one more, and then we'll wrap up.
Thank you for the talk today. So a quick question I have is like when people usually talk about like connecting people or networking, actually usually another idea coming to my mind is why don't we just do self-improvement other than networking? Because when maybe for myself, actually, like I seldom go to networking event. Actually, I never think about just try to connect with people.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about when I was back in school, I really loved what I was doing as a mechanical engineer.
Mm-hmm.
I just enjoy what I was doing mechanical stuff.
Yeah.
And then I think that's actually maybe why I actually get to more and more familiar with what I'm doing, and maybe sometimes showing better skills than the peer students among me. And actually, that's why I'm hired here at Google. Maybe that's why. But compared with my peer friends, maybe they're always trying to get connected with people in Google, but actually they cannot come here. But for me, it's like I'm just focusing on myself, focusing on what I think I should be doing. But actually, I come here and I know a lot of Google people without thinking about networking with people. So how would you like think about that when we're comparing self-improvement and connecting networking, I would say?
I mean, in the book, I do talk about those two distinctions where what you see is that, extroverts score much higher in a number of success metrics because of networking abilities. On the flip side, introverts very often excel in terms of individual performance. In fact, there's one study, what was the jargon was something like extroversion is inversely correlated with individual performance, or basically the more extroverted you are, the worse you are at your job. If you're spending a lot of time hanging out with your friends, you're probably not spending those 10,000 hours of practice. So both are very valuable. But, on average, having that network, just because you have those skills, making sure that the right people know you have those skills can make, a huge difference. How does that resume get in front of the person when there's, 1,000 other resumes? Or when you're talking about, a much more informal system like Hollywood, where there's not an HR department to become director of a movie, it's all made based on individual discretion. Networking is essential because there is no formal system by which to submit your resume. So that level of visibility makes a big difference. And let's face it, how often when you buy something, if I'm not sure, which laptop to get, you're probably going to ask your friend. Your friend's going to say, get this one, and you might go with it. Same things happens with hiring decisions. Big stack of resumes, all are pretty good. Who do you recommend? Well, I know that one guy who, and you're probably going to go with them. And that happens all the time. So it's a balance between the two. If you are more introverted, you don't enjoy networking as much, it's like focus on building skills, but that doesn't mean that networking still doesn't have its value. And on the other hand, hey, networks are great, but if you're not good at your job, that's going to be found out eventually, and you may not have that job very long. So there is a balance of the two. I don't think you can really get to the highest levels without either an enormous amount of luck or a balance between both.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for joining us. And let's
Thank
give
you.
Eric a round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you very much.